everyone, and welcome. Today, I am going to be continuing our exploration of the major neighborhoods of Chicago. Specifically, the ones that I know the most and the ones that I love visiting when I am in the city. Previously, in my first video, I went through an overview of the city as a whole and how to navigate in it. And last week, or last time, depending on when you're viewing this, I went down the coast of Lake Michigan from the north in Rogers Park to just before the Loop, with some excursions into neighborhoods to the west. Today, we are going to continue with other neighborhoods that I particularly enjoy from the northwest down to the south side. I have more experience with the northern neighborhoods, the neighborhoods along the Red Line, which is why I spent a lot more time focusing on them. But, needless to say, even though we will cover more of the city by area today, we will still be able to see a wide variety of places. Continuing with the north side, since that's the area that we have visible here, I'm going to focus a lot along this corridor here, which is Milwaukee Avenue. This, in my eyes, is the major thoroughfare among the major streets of the northwest direction of Chicago. Obviously, you have other streets like Avondale or Grand or Lincoln farther to the east, but Milwaukee serves as the heart of the Northwest. And this is evidenced by the fact that the blue line of the L runs along it for a significant portion. It obviously nowadays veers off of it once you get to Addison and Belmont. Up in this neighborhood, it veers off and becomes part of the Interstate 90 freeway, though that did not exist until the 70s, and the blue line was not extended that far until the Kennedy Expressway, as it's called now, was created. Along Milwaukee Avenue, particularly in the early 20th century, and still in a lesser extent to this day. You have a lot of Eastern European and especially Polish neighborhoods. The general term for the collective neighborhoods that primarily housed Polish people is Old Polonia or Stara Polska. And you still see remnants of it, primarily around Jefferson Park, which still hosts a yearly Polish festival around the Labor Day weekend. I was able to visit this past year, as well as strings of Polish communities, primarily between Milwaukee and Avondale Avenues, where Avondale exists. You also, closer to the south, closer to downtown in the Loop, have Pulaski Park, and nearby you have the Church of St. Stanislaus Kostka, which is a particularly Polish parish and a center of Polish Catholic community. The Polish community, especially as it exists post 1939, is particularly Catholic. Older Polish communities also have their fair share of Jewish and Yiddish speaking populations, though nowadays those are likely to congregate in more Jewish centric neighborhoods. And of course, with World War II, the Jewish population of Poland declined, hence the super saturation of Catholicism in Polish culture. Here along Milwaukee Avenue, heading north from Pulaski Park and Noble Square, which is this general neighborhood, we get to Wicker Park, which is part of the greater Bucktown community area. It's centered around, obviously, the park that is Wicker Park, but the geographic, cultural center is the three-way intersection between Milwaukee as the diagonal street, North Avenue as the east-west street, and Damon Avenue as the north-south street, which, if you remember from the history of the L, used to be Roby Avenue. It also has its own stop on the L, and Wicker Park is particularly known for being a hipster neighborhood, a quite trendy, but at times expensive neighborhood, where a lot of more touristy shops like Arc'teryx or Marine Lair or Lush tend to be. Though it also has more underground, more independent stores as well, like Myopic Books, which is a beloved multi-story bookstore. It definitely is among my favorite bookstores, if not my favorite in Chicago. Quite a wonderful neighborhood. Another tends to be hipster neighborhood along the stretch of Milwaukee is Logan Square, which is similar to Wicker Park, has its own square that is called Logan Square along Logan Boulevard. This is also a neighborhood that has a lot of independent small businesses. And although it has a hip vibe, it isn't as commercialized as Wicker Park is. Has a little bit more of the grit that Chicago was known for. It also, to harken back 2 videos ago, has a boulevard, and it's part of the arc of the Chicago Boulevard system. Both Logan Boulevard and Kedzie Boulevard, extending south, are part of the system. In between, you have Palmer Square, which is a little bit more hectic, a little less well put together, but it is still a good, independent neighborhood along Milwaukee. And I recently spent my first time there for a while, longer than, say, an hour, on my most recent trip to Chicago, and I particularly liked it. We also have, along Diversey Avenue, Kosciuszko Park, another park that's reminiscent of Old Polonia. We also touched on Jefferson Park already. And returning south, one thing that I've forgotten to mention in between Wicker Park and Palmer Square and Logan Square is possibly my favorite hidden gem, something that is not frequently talked about in tourist articles of Chicago, but is something that a lot of locals use, is the Bloomingdale Trail, which follows Bloomingdale Avenue, which is in between North and Armitage Avenues, from Ashland all the way east to, I believe, almost Pulaski, another very Polish road named after Kazimierz Pulaski, who was a general in the Revolutionary War, the American Revolutionary War, mind you. And the Bloomingdale Trail is a disused rail line that has been converted into a hiking, walking, and bicycling trail. It's particularly well used among locals, although it did have to have some restricted access during 2020 when a lot of people used it during the early stages of COVID and weren't exactly keeping social distance as they should have been. But now it's open to the public. It has been roughly since the summer of 2021. Continuing south, I'm going to refold the map. A little awkwardly, but this saves us time in the nearer future. Continuing down along the boulevard system, I think my favorite park along the system is Garfield Park. The best thing about Garfield Park, in my opinion, is the conservatory, which is a garden, a series of indoor and outdoor gardens on a compact but very beautiful campus in the park. You do have to reserve tickets to be there, but I believe the tickets are free, though they do encourage donating to the Conservatory Foundation, because it is not cheap to grow and maintain the wide variety of plants and ecosystems that they have there. It's well worth a visit. A little closer to downtown, we get into the neighborhoods of, primarily the neighborhood of Pilsen, which earns its name primarily from the Czech immigrants that immigrated there from the town of Pilsen in the Czech Republic, or Czechia as it's now known, and which is now a part of the larger Hispanic community, particularly Mexican and Mexican and Puerto Rican communities, although other Latin and South American communities coexist there as well. My favorite thing to do when visiting Pilsen, in addition to visiting all of the markets and restaurants that really speak to the Latin American heritage of the community, is the National Museum of Mexican Art, which is also a free with the cost of donation museum dedicated to art primarily from communities in and around Mexico, having both native to Mexico but also Mexican immigrants to Chicago and the rest of the United States. As art museums go, it is an absolute bargain for the price of free plus donation, and it is quite a good way to spend an hour or an hour and a half of a morning or an afternoon. Farther to the north, where now we have the Eisenhower Expressway, which is Interstate 290. We have the Illinois Medical District, which is a series of medical campuses, both public, primarily focused around the Cook County Hospital, servicing the county that Chicago is in, as well as a number of university hospitals, the most well-known of which is Rush University, which is named in honor of Benjamin Rush, one of the founding fathers of the United States. It isn't a particularly spectacular neighborhood in terms of walking around, but it is an important landmark in the city, and it's also a good place to spot a place where the pink line of the L runs through one of the hospital buildings, like literally through a hole, as it were, in the building. Just north of there is a site that is listed here under its old name, which is Chicago Stadium, which used to be the place where the Chicago Bulls, the NBA or National Basketball Association team for Chicago, played. On a similar site in the area is now the United Center, which is where the Bulls now play. Obviously, as we get into the loop, we get into the major portion of what we would consider downtown Chicago. This is where the center of the Chicago L system is. The loop that 5 of the 8 lines of the L travel around, and 2 more, the blue line and the red line, travel underneath. This is also where the terminuses of the major rail lines are. You have Millennium Station near what is here labeled as Grant Park, but which is now been redeveloped as Millennium Park for the new millennium around 2000. You have LaSalle Station. You have the Union Station, serving the northern area. Actually, I think I have that backwards. Union Station is here, serving the southern portion of Chicago, and north of it is the Ogilvy Center, which services the northern portion of Chicago and the northern suburbs. You also have City Hall here along Wells, at the corner of Wells and Washington. You also have the Art Institute of Chicago, which is the premier art museum in Chicago, as well as a institute, a school in itself. It is not a free museum, unfortunately, but it is an absolute wealth of different art forms and art styles and art history, and it is well worth the price of admission, in my opinion. along Grant Park, you have Museum Campus. We talked about the Natural History Museum, now the Field Museum, as well as the Adler Planetarium and the Shed Aquarium. We also talked about Mike's Field, the airport that no longer is. We also have Soldier Field, which is where the Chicago Bears, the National Football League team, playing American football, plays. Last bit I want to share in this view of Chicago is this area right here, which I'll actually fold over so that we can see fully. Here along Cermak Avenue, around the intersection with Archer Avenue, is Chicago's Chinatown. This is the center for Chinese history and culture around Chicago. And it has also been a battleground for conversations around gentrification and city and urban development within the city. Particularly among people who want to develop it for populations that are not part of the larger Chinese and East Asian communities that tend to center themselves around this area. Here along the South Branch of the Chicago River is where you find the staunchest support and the, in my opinion, best development of the area with regard to protecting the Chinese community. Along here you'll find Pingatom Park, which is a public park that is just off of the Orange Line as it arcs its way along Archer Avenue, and just a short walk away from the Red Line stop at Cermak. It's a wonderful place, and it's a peaceful place despite being so nestled into the bustle of Chinatown. Another park that I love to highlight as an oasis within the city is Palmisano Park, which doesn't exist in this map because it did not exist in the 50s, but which still exists just off of Archer as well, and is a more modern take on park architecture, but it is still a peaceful oasis among the bustle of the heart of Chicago, as this neighborhood is called. Another thing that's missing from this map because of its age is McCormick Place, along what is here labeled as South Park, but what is now Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. This McCormick Place is the primary convention center for downtown Chicago. It is a major destination for conventions and large meetups on the national and international scale. It is now serviced by a Green Line station, although that station was not a was a more recent addition to the line. It had been closed earlier in the 1900s, but it has since reopened as of, I believe, the early 2010s. Further south, you have Comiskey Park, the stadium for the Chicago White Sox, the American League team, I believe, for baseball, one half of the baseball rivalry that exists within Chicago. It has a red line stop, and its parallel green line stop on 35th is around the yet to be built, as of the creation of this map, Illinois Institute of Technology, which is a technology and also architecture university college in this neighborhood, associated also historically with the African American or Black community, which typically goes by the name of Bronzeville, which was the center of the Chicago portion of the artistic movement that in New York was called the Harlem Renaissance. And it was the center of the jazz and blues scenes within the 40s and 50s and also 1930s in Chicago. A lot of IIT, the Illinois Institute of Technology, was designed by the brutalist, sometimes brutalist, but sometimes known as minimalist or Bauhaus architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, who also designed a number of the skyscrapers that are seen in the Loop and other neighborhoods of central Chicago. Here on this map, but here no longer, are the Dean Stockyards, which were a major meat packing and processing plant and a major industrial and job source on the south side of Chicago. It closed down in the later 1900s, I believe in the 1970s, due primarily to social and environmental concerns. There were a lot of pollution concerns with the Union Stockyards using and polluting the South Fork of the South Branch of the Chicago River here. And there were significant air pollution concerns, primarily for the neighborhoods downwind of the stockyards, to the point where these neighborhoods are called, and still called to this day, the back of the yards, or just back of the yards. Now these Stockyards are no more, although the sparse neighborhood structure still exists. It is still a mostly industrial office and railroad using type of neighborhood area. Here along the 50s and 60s, we get a pair of neighborhoods on opposite sides of the city that are particularly notable. You have the area around Chicago Midway Airport, which is primarily residential, primarily single home based. But because it's near the airport, it also has a significant number of hotels and touristy locations around it, less in terms of attractions and more in terms of restaurants. So this is where you'll find your Culver's, your Applebee's, your McDonald's, as well as a number of chain hotels that tend to congregate around the airport. Outside of the major roads and the first half mile or so around Midway, it does tend to get more neighborhoody and more residential, more welcoming, in my opinion. And on the opposite side, you get the pleasant neighborhood of Hyde Park, which is known for being a neighborhood of two worlds. You have an island of perceived grace and serenity around the University of Chicago and around Jackson Park, which has rose gardens and beaches along the lake shore, and the Museum of Science and Industry. And outside of that is a neighborhood that is known stereotypically as a more dangerous neighborhood, but is consistent with other neighborhoods on the south side of Chicago. The south side, in general, tends to get a bad rap and is seen as a less desirable and more violent side of Chicago. And while, yes, crime rates tend to be higher among certain neighborhoods, they're largely centralized around specific communities, specific families, and specific associations like gangs. You can live and survive in these neighborhoods like in any neighborhood, and their association is largely, in my opinion, blown out of the water by particularly the modern news cycle. That isn't meant to downplay the people who are affected by the violence that does exist in the neighborhoods, but there's a lot of violence around Chicago, and as it is a large city, and so long as you are careful and have your way around you, and know where you're going and know where you're visiting, you can visit the south side without much fear of retaliation. reach the southern end of the map. And we get to the southernmost portions of the boulevard system in Chicago along Marquette Road to Marquette Park. And you have a number of golf courses in Marquette Park, as well as in the southern portions of Jackson Park and the South Shore Country Club. I will admit, as someone who spent a lot of time living on the north side of Chicago, I have less to say about the south side and its neighborhoods, but that doesn't mean that their neighborhoods aren't worth visiting for their good reasons. I hope with this overview of the city in the past 3 videos, you've been able to get more of an appreciation for the city. I hope I've inspired some of you to visit. And if you have questions for me about the city, and if you'd like me to focus on specific areas in future videos, I would love to hear them, and I'd love to see them in the comments for this video. So hopefully you've made it this far, and hopefully you'll be able to share some of that with me. All right. Thank you for joining me in this 3-part series going through this map. Thank you for watching all the way through, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.